Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. What's the deal with Debunking Atheists, Volume 1? I'm just going to go over a few objections that atheists make about the existence of God, and then I'll tell you what's wrong with them. Atheists have dozens and dozens and dozens of arguments against the existence of God, and there's flaws in every last one of them. I'm going to go through them. I've already gone through a lot of them. But when I come across them, I like to show you how to get out of these arguments. So in this video, I'm just going to address two arguments. The first argument is the idea that God is so unlikely as to be impossible in terms of pure statistical probability. So the atheist will argue that God is only one of an infinite number of potential supernatural beings. And in addition, that this particular universe that we happen to live in is also only one of an infinite potential number of universes. So when you can combine those two infinitely unlikely scenarios, that you would have this particular God and this particular universe, you're talking about combining the odds of two infinitesimals, making it impossible that that could ever happen. An infinitesimal is an infinite subdivision of something. So if something just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, theoretically, we call that an infinitesimal, the smallest unit in something. But it's infinitely small, so it doesn't actually have a finite size. It's just infinitely small. It's a mathematical concept. Okay. So what's wrong with this idea? Well, let's take it to pieces. The first assertion is that God is only one of an infinite number of potential supernatural beings who could be responsible for creating the universe. Now, that is false. There can only be one uncaused God. It's important that the creator of the universe be uncaused. Because if the creator was caused, then you could ask, well, what caused that creator? And you could just keep asking that question for each subsequent creator if they're caused. And there would never be an end to it. So the creator of the universe has to be uncaused, or the creator of the cosmos, assuming there's no multiverse of any sort. So it has to be uncaused. Well, an uncaused creator cannot itself be made of parts. Because if it was made of parts, then it would be caused by those parts, and therefore it would be caused. It couldn't be an uncaused creator. So there can only be one uncaused creator. And the reason is because it can't have parts. And if there's more than one uncaused God, well, then each of those gods would consist of a part of this metaphysical reality that's responsible for the creation of the cosmos or the universe. And that would be, if there were parts, then that would be a caused thing. So it couldn't be uncaused. So more than one God would result in the gods being parts, thus being caused, thus not being uncaused, thus not being the cause of the cosmos or the universe. So there can only be one creator of the universe or the cosmos, and that creator is an uncaused God made of no parts whatsoever. We call this principle divine simplicity, but it does have the effect of there only being one creator allowed, because you can't have parts. So, the first assertion that there's an infinite number of supernatural beings besides God that create the cosmos is false. There can only be one. So, the next assertion is that there's an infinite number of potential universes besides this one. So, how come this one was created and not one of the infinite other potential universes? So, doesn't that make uh, the creation of this particular universe impossible, essentially, since it's an infinitesimal unlikelihood that this would be created? Doesn't that mean that it's essentially impossible? And the argument would be that only this universe is possible, and that's why it's here. Well, the answer to that is no, because there's several reasons. But first, the odds of this particular universe being chosen to be created, those odds, yes, that's true. There are an infinite number of possible universes that could have been chosen. But those odds are no different under theism or atheism. They're the same odds. So this argument doesn't give any real preference to atheism at all. So in theism, you have a God that decides among an infinite number of potential universes to create this particular universe. But under atheism, you have the same problem. So even if you had uh, a reality that had an infinite regress backward in time, because that infinite regress is unending, you would have had to have gone through every possible universe already before the present moment arrived. So you're still talking about the selection of this particular universe among an infinite number of possibilities. So those sort of odds are exactly the same, regardless of whether you're talking about theism or atheism. There's no reason to say that this hurts theism and it doesn't hurt atheism. It's the same argument. Um, so another way out of this is, well, yes, there is an infinite number of potential universes that God could create, but they're not all the same. Some are more interesting to God than others. I've done a video about one of the cosmological arguments for the existence of God called the dichotomy of existence. And it talks about the concept of everythingness. Well, because God has this uncaused power to create everything that is logically possible, that's a state of that's essentially God's power to create everythingness. Um, but in everythingness, not every possible creation is as interesting as every other possible creation. Some creations have far more interesting things in them. So, yes, God could choose among an infinite number of universes to create, but not all universes are equally interesting. And God certainly could have selected this one in particular because it was interesting to God for God's reasons. Um, and another point is, God is capable of creating more than one universe. So we don't actually know how many universes God has created. God may have only created this one, but God may have created others. So we don't actually know if there are other universes. Um, so who knows exactly how many universes God has created? Only God knows that. And we can't figure that out anyway because we can't leave the universe in order to discover other universes. That would be a violation of the principle of conservation of energy and mass if we actually left the universe to discover other universes. We can't do that. That's a violation of laws of physics. We can't do it. So we can't know about whether other universes exist or not. But theoretically, they could. Okay, I think that's enough about that argument. Oh, one last point. Uh, the argument that, well, this universe is an infinitesimal in the range of possible universes, making it an impossibility. Well, it's here. The universe is here. So its very existence proves that even if it were an infinitesimal, that doesn't make it impossible to exist because it's here. All right, on to argument two. This argument is that something has to exist because absolute nothingness is impossible. Um, Therefore, physical reality must exist out of necessity because the alternative, that is, of absolutely nothing at all, is impossible. It's an impossibility. Therefore, somethingness must exist. And if somethingness must exist, then why do you need a God? You don't need a God to create that or sustain it because it has to exist, whether you like it or not, because absolute nothingness is impossible. So why do you need a God? Simple argument. The answer to this argument is that absolute nothingness is, in fact, a coherent theoretical metaphysical concept. Uh, Absolute nothingness means the absence of God and any physical reality that God creates. Absolute nothingness is not related to the concept of physical reality. It's related to the concept of God, the creator of physical reality. Physical reality is a derivative created by God. God is the uncaused creative being responsible for physical reality. Absolute nothingness is really a um, contradistinction to God, not to physical reality. See, you could theoretically have just God and no physical reality whatsoever. So the first thing is, yeah, you have to understand what absolute nothingness actually means. It doesn't mean, as many people think it does, the absence of physical reality or not something or um, the state of non-existence, which presumes a place to put something in, some physical place you can put something in, like a void or outer space. Well, that's not what absolute nothingness is. Absolute nothingness is not a place that you can put things. It's not just a void. Absolute nothingness, like I said, is the absence of God and all the physical reality God created. Now, if you get rid of God, you automatically get rid of anything God created. So, absolute nothingness is the absence of God. It's an uncaused theoretical metaphysical state of existence, but don't confuse it with physical reality. It's not the same thing. Absolute nothingness is not something that can be imagined. It's not um, a void that you can think about. That's thinking in terms of physical reality. Absolute nothingness really has nothing to do with physical reality. If anything, absolute nothingness is just a horrible thought. It sends chills down my spine when I think about it. But it's not something that you can imagine. Um, it's not a visual thing at all. It's not a place. It's not matter or energy. It's the absence of God. Um, but the good news is, because God is uncaused, you can't destroy God. He's not made of parts, and destruction requires the disassociation of parts. So God, being uncaused, cannot be destroyed. So a state of absolute nothingness could only exist if God were destroyed. But it's impossible to destroy God. So absolute nothingness is purely a theoretical, hypothetical, metaphysical state of existence, which could never be the case, and has never been the case, and will never be the case. But it's a metaphysical concept that's interesting. So the first way to debunk this argument is, hey, absolute nothingness is a coherent theoretical metaphysical state of existence. So that could be the case theoretically, and it wouldn't be necessary that physical reality exist if absolute nothingness were the case. Um, the idea that physical reality is necessary because you can't have nothingness is problematic, because that would require the creation of physical reality from nothing, which is inherently incoherent and impossible. The Latin phrase of philosophical truth for thousands of years, known as ex nihilo nihil fit, says that you can't get something from nothing, or from nothing, nothing comes. So you can't get physical reality from nothing. You can say physical reality is necessary, um, but you still can't get it from nothing. So that just proves that physical reality, in fact, isn't necessary. Another problem is, even if you could get physical reality from nothing, which you can, you still have the problem of creating order. Where does first order come from? Where does that first wrinkle in the smoothness boundary of nothingness? How is that created? What determines that's existence? What determines what that's going to be? Well, again, there's nothing to determine it. So how can it be determined? The answer is it can't. It can't be determined. So essentially, this idea of physical reality being necessary because you can't have a state of nothingness is patently false, because something can't come from nothing. It's an impossibility. Um, all right. Well, those are two atheistic objections that I've answered. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Press the subscribe button. I appreciate it. And I hope you learned something, and take care.